Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, Sandra reflected on her early life in Uruguay, her family's escape from the Holocaust, and how growing up in a small Jewish immigrant community shaped her worldview. If you missed it, check out part 1. In part 2, Sandra talks about her time at BioMarin, how she led commercial efforts for rare disease therapies, learned to work cross-functionally, and saw firsthand the impact of patient-centered drug development. She also shares what drew her to startup life, why she left Big Pharma, and the spark that led her to start building companies of her own.
And now you're going to a much smaller organization where you're wearing all the hats. and so very different, kind of like polar opposite. Talk about the kind of the early days at BioMarin.
When I joined BioMarin, the company was about 250 employees. When I left, it was about 4,000. When I joined, the company stock was at $4. When I left, the company stock was at $120. When I joined, they had one product they were marketing, which they had acquired, or a pred. When I left, they had 3 products that they were marketing, and a pipeline that would be like the envy of any biotech company, a rich, thick pipeline. So basically, BioMarin was a rocket ship, and I joined pretty early, is the bottom line. And I had 2 eras in BioMarin. The first era is when I was in the marketing department. I was leading the marketing department to execute the first few launches for BioMarin. So BioMarin had never launched a drug before on their own. And now we were going to go ahead and execute this. These launches were in rare diseases. So diseases that generally affected 15,000 people in the US, sometimes 1,000 people in the US. And so they were very different than anything else that I had experienced. So it was complete entrepreneurship, complete innovation, pioneering, coming up with new ideas. And in a way, it was a really good job for me because it was a little bit of like, well, we could look at Big Pharma and see what they're doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to do it. We need to think critically and, analyze what is the situation and then decide to create this playbook for this rare disease company. And now there are a lot of rare disease manufacturers, but at that point they weren't. There were really like 5 or 6 companies operating in the rare disease market. So this job was great for me. It was completely an opportunity to innovate, to feel like a pioneer, to work on drugs that were first to market, right? Like the drugs that BioMarin was working on, there is no treatment. And we're going from no treatment to a treatment. And the other thing that was really important in that job is we were very close to the patients. Okay, so, at Johnson & Johnson, we would see patients, but generally they would come to this national sales meeting and they would be fully prepped. And they would do a speech at the national sales meeting telling us how important Remicade was to them. This is not how we saw them at BioMarin. At BioMarin, they came every time we had a get-together for employees, and they were part of the family. They were part of the BioMarin family, to the extent that I am still friends on Facebook with some of our patients, the parents of the patients. I was invited to the high school graduation of a patient who thought she wasn't going to live to reach her high school graduation. And due to the fact that she has been on BioMarin's drug Naglazyme, she is still alive. She's about 36 years old right now. So this is like what we were doing at BioMarin was so meaningful. And every day you could wake up and see the meaning that the value that we were delivering to people's lives, like literally extending the lives of these very sick patients with rare genetic diseases. That was the first part of Naglazyme. The second product was Kuvan. Those patients were a little bit more controlled. They had a little bit better outcomes. but still we're very, very close to the patients. And some of the work that was happening, let's say in PKU, was really foundational to the PKU community. So that was the one of the important things of seeing how a biopharma company that is coming into a rare disease has the real opportunity to partner with those patients and create not just a drug, but create structures, education, advocacy that is going to benefit all the patients, whether they are on the treatment or not. And that's a lot of what we did in that market in PKU. We basically set up the structure for a national PKU alliance, for advocacy, for the treatment, as well as for education, like clearing up a lot of the messages that were wrong in that particular disease area. So that was the first 4 years.
Wow.
Incredible experience.
Wow.
I worked really hard.
You like, there's like, put you in the deep end. Like there's like a wonderful deep end, but there's like, here you go. And like
deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, looking back, I recommend it. I mean, I think it was good. And, you know, during this time, I also thought like, oh, you know what? It's probably a good time to have a second child because my first child is like 3 already. And like we moved, so we were waiting. We weren't going to have a baby when we were moving. So my daughter was born a week before Kuvan, the second product of BioMarin, launched. So I had 2 babies and we're launching pretty much at the same time.
There we go. Like, man, like talk about double deep ends. Like yeah. Double deep end. And so the next era of BioMarin, the next kind of 4 to 5 years, like how did things change for you in that era?
Yeah, significantly, actually. So what happened is I launched Kuvan, and at that point, I was part of what's called the core team, which is the program management team that is developing the product forward. It's moving the product forward, even past approval, to think about extensions and all those things. Being part of that team, I had access to the core team lead at that point was Dan Oppenheimer, who came to me and said, you know, you've done the launch. We are now working on a second product for PKU, PEG-PAL, which is now called Palynziq. And I am thinking it would be great, since you already launched one product, that we take you and put you in a position where you lead the core team, the cross-functional core team, for moving this product that is currently in phase 2. And we need to get it to phase 3 and approval. So this would be a very different job. You're bringing in all your commercial know-how of knowing what the end goal is, what we're trying to get to. But the product is in phase 2, and your role is now to manage this cross-functional team, manufacturing, regulatory, clinical operations, clinical and commercial, to oversee the entire strategy and move the product forward. So he asked me if I was interested in the job. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I'm totally interested in the job. It's like, number one, it's like, it's so much more strategic than what I've been doing, which is like, I was doing the blocking, you know, the
tactical stuff.
Like the rubber is meeting the road. The rubber is meeting the road, and the product has to get to the patient, right? And the website has to get to the patient, and the patient has to be able to register. So it was all there was strategy, but it was also the tactical implementation. So I like that role, 1, because it was more strategic, 2, because it was going to allow me the opportunity to see the entire development process and then manage and get familiar with the entire biopharma operations, right? So anyway, so they worked it out with the bosses, and, you know, because basically it's like, hey, can I steal your person?
Yeah. Hope you don't mind. Like,
I hope you don't mind, but
we're gonna take a rock star and just put it on someone else's team.
You want to steal her? Is that okay?
Yeah. Hope you're okay with that. Yeah.
So anyway, they worked it out, and I moved over to program management to lead the core team for Palynziq, and I got the product in phase 2, and that was a very strategic role where we're basically working through all of the different things that are going to lead us. The first milestone we're trying to hit is an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA, right? That's what we need to get to. And so for this end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA, we need the clinical trial done. We need to have manufacturing pretty stable. We need to have regulatory filings, like all, in good shape. And so that was the kind of the first milestone. And then the second milestone was, okay, now after the end of phase 2, now we have to get ready to start the phase 3 and then complete the phase 3. So I was at BioMarin during those 4 years where all of this was being done. This product was particularly challenging and new and pioneering, not only for BioMarin, but for the entire industry. It was a bacterial enzyme that was being delivered as an injectable medication. So things that kind of hadn't been done before. There wasn't like very standard manufacturing.
Yeah, there wasn't precedent for it.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of precedent for a lot of these things. BioMarin had never launched an injectable medication. We had an infusible and we had a tablet. So there was a lot of new components here to work with. And from the perspective of me growing as a professional, this job just completely opened my brain. Like now I could talk about clinical trials. I could talk about manufacturing of these drugs. I could talk about regulatory filings in commercial, which I knew very intimately. So it was an excellent move for me. And it was also an excellent move for BioMarin because we did tackle the things that came up. I always called it, that job was a bit of like playing whack-a-mole. It's like, okay, month 1, manufacturing is not working. Whack that one.
Yeah.
Month 2, clinical trial enrollment is not happening. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
Month 3, the FDA delayed our meeting for blah, blah, blah. So it's like, and every month there was something happening, but we got through it, had a great team, had a couple of great people working under me as well. And so I got the product all the way through to like almost the end of the phase 3. And then another phone call came.
Yeah. There's a theme here.
Yes.
Yes. Interesting. And I guess of that like when you look back on the BioMarin experience, like what's like, I guess, what did you find most exciting about it? Like about the BioMarin, like not looking back about your roles there, and what was like the hardest part? Like it couldn't have been all puppies and rainbows.
No, it wasn't. It was very hard work. It was actually quite intense and somewhat stressful. So I think the best parts were that, I think the best parts for me, for somebody with entrepreneurial spirit, is that we were doing new things. We were innovating. We were creating things from scratch. We were basically almost like dictating and testing the playbook for launching rare disease drugs, for developing rare disease drugs at scale and being able to do it in a repeatable way, right? So that was what was really exciting, and all the things that come with that we're very open and willing to try new approaches. There's a lot of variety of experiences, pilot programs we're comparing. So it had a high degree of innovation and pioneering and trial and entrepreneurship. So that was what was good. What was challenging is that it was very intense. It's not, it wasn't a cushy job, right? Yeah. Like there was always things going on. The job required a tremendous amount of energy. There was also a lot of travel involved with the job to go to congresses. And at this point I had either 1 or 2 young children. So the job was definitely challenging. There was also the organization to work through, right? And the degree to which the entire organization was aligned to try some of the things that we wanted to try, let's say, to do that. And then there were also managing expectations. Like I remember early on in the launch of Kuvan, Kuvan had very high expectations. Everybody thought, oh, everybody should take this. This is like the best thing that ever happened to PKU. And you know what? It turned out that patients had a lot of inertia. They had misconceptions about how their disease worked. They had misconceptions about how the diet, which was the other thing that you could do to control PKU, how effective it was for them. And so it took a while to really begin to educate patients and providers to say, there is an opportunity for this product. It can help this type of patient, and it's not going to help every patient. That was one of the most challenging things we had to do at BioMarin, to navigate that line of saying it can help your patient, but it's not going to help every patient, right? And you have the opportunity to try it. So we set up a trial program for the product that was very innovative. So patients could try it for free and see if it worked. And then if it worked, if they were a responder to the product, then they can, they would stay on. And then if they weren't, they would come off. So the product was challenging that I was launching. The market was challenging and had a tremendous amount of inertia, miseducation. The organization of BioMarin was growing rapidly. So people were being added and, not everybody was able to work with each other, right? So I do remember, lots of movement, lots of changes. And, the other side of trying to do innovative things is that they're innovative things that haven't been done before. So many times I had to go to compliance and tell them, oh, I know that there are no websites out there requesting patient information, but that's what we have to do, right? And so I actually appear in the book that was written about BioMarin, basically saying this quote, which is, I don't want to come here with an idea for compliance and for you compliance to tell me no. I want you to tell me how. Like, how do we do this? This is what we need to do. We need to get patients into a patient database, right? What do we need to do to make that happen? Because a flat no is not going to work for the situation that we're in right now. So that's kind of like the other side, that there was a lot of maneuvering and sort of like figuring it out that had to happen, which is not always pleasant.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine those are hard conversations.
Yes.
Yeah. And, as you look, in holistically looking back on BioMarin, like what are some like key lessons or takeaways that you carry with you to this day that derive from that BioMarin experience?
The first one is that we are in business for the patient. And the closest that we could be to that patient in understanding them, their family, their life, their concerns, what they know about their disease, what they don't know about their disease, the better we all win. For sure. That is number one. Number two, the people in the organization really matter. Like, people make or break a launch. A launch is, it's like this big thing. We're launching this product. This really is about the people that are showing up. And if you have like a really committed product manager that's like, she wants to get this done, it's going to get done, right? If you have really committed sales director, and he's going to get everybody motivated to go the extra mile, it's going to get done. So the people really matter a lot. At the end of the day, whatever strategies we're talking about are all implemented with people. And so the people we select for these roles, how we retain them, how we tell them they're doing a good job, how we help them grow in their roles is incredibly important. And then I think the other thing with BioMarin is to sort of like welcome growth. It was an organization that kind of never sat still. It was always looking for like, what else can we be adding to this pipeline? What else could we be doing? And I think in business, that's a really good mindset to have. We do business within a dynamic market that is completely changing. And the posture is awake and engaged with the market, right? So that we can understand what's happening, what is changing. We cannot be asleep at the wheel. We cannot be sort of like resting in our laurels. Oh, we could just not rest. It's like business is an active, it's like an active posture of like, we are in the market, we're present in it, we are listening, we're understanding, we're adjusting our behavior, and we're constantly trying to improve what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think, especially when you get some like early wins, you can kind of start to feel that kind of like, it's like complacency is a bit too strong in this case, but like, you're just like, great, we can like ride this one out. And you kind of, the sense of urgency, you can feel it kind of like starting to draw, but it sounds like BioMarin is like, that did not stop the urgency. And I can imagine when you're interfacing with patients, the urgency is very present. That this is just the beginning. Like we should be doing more. And I absolutely agree. Business is kind of like it's almost like you're like going through growth spurts constantly. Like constantly. And then when you stop growing is when you're dead.
Exactly.
So it's like incredibly important to keep that in mind when you start to feel that kind of like the sense of urgency starting to kick or kind of like slow down. And so now you got that telephone call. You're just like,
the telephone call.
yeah. What like I mean, it's not. BioMarin sounded like an awesome gig. What and when did you know it's time to leave? Like, and how did that conversation go?
I think I could have stayed at BioMarin for the next 10 years. I don't think I would have left because I liked my job. I was engaged in it. And things were going well. But I did get a phone call. And this time the phone call was about a smaller company. So, my ears perked up because one of the things I noticed was like, okay, well, I'm going smaller and smaller and smaller. And Johnson & Johnson, right? BioMarin. And then this smaller company calls and Nora Therapeutics. They had done some venture backing that raised something like $28 million. And they had a compound that they were testing in women's health, in IVF failure and recurrent miscarriage. And here I was going to get to be the vice president. So it was going to be an increase in title because at BioMarin I was executive director. And it would also, the company was in Palo Alto and I was living in Marin, very close to BioMarin. As a working mother, I always like to live very close to my work area because then it meant that, if the kids needed to be picked up from school, I was 5 minutes away. Or if somebody got sick, I was 5 minutes away. And, of course, I had a lot of caregiving support during that time, but it made me feel better to be very close to work. And so this job was in Palo Alto. So we had to think at that point as a family whether or not we wanted to move to Palo Alto. And we really did. We did want to move to Palo Alto. My son at that time was a chess competitor, chess champion, and
Cool.
all his tournaments were in Santa Clara.
Oh.
That's where they were. So, and, my daughter was younger. So for her, it was like a little bit less of like her activities were just beginning to be nascent, just beginning to be there. And she hadn't really even started school yet, like first grade.
Yep.
So when this call came, it wasn't just about moving jobs. It was basically about finding the next life that I thought would be really good for our children and giving them an opportunity to raise them in a place that would be vibrant and interesting for them. And so the Palo Alto component was very important in the job. And, took another leap and then basically said yes to the job, which allowed us to move to Palo Alto. My kids practically grew up in Palo Alto, which is one of the best places to grow up in. It is not what the media portrays. My kids went to public schools in Palo Alto. They rode their bikes there along with dozens of other kids riding their bikes together. Huge sense of community and almost like this idyllic, like old-time feeling of like everyone in the community is taking care of the kids that are going on their bikes to school. So I'm actually really glad from a family perspective that we did that and we moved to Palo Alto. Of course, housing was always very complicated.
Yeah. Yes.
but we managed it. And then so the kids grew up in Palo Alto and I got this job. And so I had this job at Nora Therapeutics. I was VP of Strategic Marketing and Commercial Operations. I'm joining the company in phase 2 of this compound that has 2 clinical trials. And basically, I'm the first commercial person. There's 8 people in the company.
Oh.
We pretty much all sit in one room together all day long. And the whole goal of the company is to finish these phase 2 studies and ideally get enough positive data to then go do an IPO to then do the phase 3. So the proposition was exciting, right? Like it was very exciting because it was like there's an opportunity to start at the bottom of this and also take it somewhere and start even early than I did at BioMarin. So I came into this job very quickly after they unblind the results of the first study in IVF failure and the drug failed. And people were like pretty upset. And I'm in the job for a month when this happens. I'm like,
oh my God.
Okay. That's not good.
Yeah, this is, I just relocated my whole family month one. Oh, goodness. Like,
Palo Alto, it has to be at
yeah,
least another job. Like it's
yeah,
fine.
yeah.
But basically it's like, okay, that's not good that the drug failed. And, we're all thinking like, well, I wonder what this means for the second study, the second indication, recurrent miscarriage. And so very quickly we shift the whole company to be like, okay, well, IVF failure is done. Like the drug failed for IVF failure. And now we have to refocus everything to recurrent miscarriage. Let's go there. Let's get the study done. The study was having difficulty enrolling, yet the patients for this study, they were all online. Generally women that are suffering for any kind of infertility complication, they turn online to talk to other women that are suffering from the same infertility complication. So they were all online, and yet the study was struggling. And I'm sitting here being like, okay, I'm like, commercial operations is the one responsible for this, but they're putting a lot of marketing things together to help this, so I can help. So I basically start putting together for them what eventually becomes like a patient activation campaign to let these women know that there's a clinical trial that they can join if they had this recurrent miscarriage happening to them. And so we patched this thing up. And what appears to me is like, I can't go and hire a company to do this. There's no company that can do Facebook ads for me, that can do Google ads for me and tell these women and these specific women, like, why doesn't this exist, right? So anyway, we patch it up. I patch up like this and that. And we get into a system where we have some leads coming in, some patients that are self-referring themselves. We're sending them into the sites, and eventually the study enrolls. And then maybe about a year into my stay there, they unblind the study, and there is no significant effect of this medicine. So the drug failed.
Oh, boy. That's brutal.
Yes. And so at that point, basically, as the CEO talking to us saying, we had one compound, we had two indications, the drug failed in both. That's it. This is the end of the road for this company. We plan to disband the company, and we will give you each a severance package. So for the first time in my life, I got a severance package.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, like, and also this is like right off the back of like BioMarin as well, which was just like just homers, hitting homers. And so like it might have, I can't imagine how you were feeling. So it's kind of like a stark contrast.
Very stark contrast, because BioMarin by then was a stable company. I could count that it wasn't really going to go down. I could count that I was getting paid my salary and my benefits and my stock options. And then I trade all of that to take this risk, right? Which ends up, from that perspective, not panning out. However, the risk does pan out. So let me tell you how it all makes sense.
Yeah. Tell me.
At Nora Therapeutics, I discovered a huge hole in the market. I discovered that companies like Nora Therapeutics were not able to find a single end-to-end provider of online patient enrollment. And I knew that this was a hole because I went to try to find it, and I couldn't find companies that were doing it either end-to-end enough or well enough, right? And so at Nora, what I gain from that experience is that I gain the understanding that there is a huge problem in this market that affects pretty much every single biopharma company, and that is currently not being solved properly. And that at the same time, there's this emerging technology, Facebook advertising, Google, Instagram, TikTok. I mean, TikTok wasn't even there, but it's going to keep going, where there's an opportunity to reach patients through digital channels, and that we are at that point not taking advantage of it. And this is now 10 years ago. So it's a long time ago. Things have obviously changed. And so when I leave Nora Therapeutics, I say, I'm not going to go get another job. I'm not. I have a few months of severance where the company is paying me. where I don't have to worry about benefits or my salary. I'm going to go and I'm going to start a company. And I'm going to start a company that is going to do what I just discovered that I couldn't find a good company to do for Nora Therapeutics, right? I'm going to go set that up. I'm going to set it up the way I would want to buy it, right? And then see if anybody wants it.
Very cool.
So that's the thing that at first sight, it looks like I'm going from BioMarin where I have an excellent job, like top of the line job in everything. And I take this risk to go to a startup whose product ends up failing a year from them. But that year was very important to me because in that year, I do two things. One, I take off my golden handcuffs, right? I say, I don't need to be in this golden handcuff situation. I can be not in that.
Yep.
I take off my golden handcuffs. And then two, I discover that there is a problem that I could set up a company to fix.
Yep.
And so that was actually invaluable.
Yep. And I love that because I think I'm a firm believer in that every experience is accretive in some way. Like, just like accumulating these experiences, it's kind of like putting yourself out there. It's kind of like, exactly, you got to just put yourself out there and you'll discover it. And I sometimes think putting your, like, the kind of like the BioMarin hitting home runs kind of situation, it doesn't present, like going to a smaller company where there is some setbacks, it opens your eyes to things that BioMarin would have never, would let's probably not see, because you're just like, you have all these successes. But it's like, for me, when I started Exceeder, I did rotations at Berkeley, just like in laboratories, like some well-funded, not so well-funded. If I spent all my time in a well-funded laboratory, Exceeder probably wouldn't exist, because getting equipment was not a problem. Like, exactly. I remember people would just buy like $40,000 of consumables, forget about them in the fridge.
Yes.
And if you want a piece of equipment, let's get 3 of them.
Yes.
And just, right? And if I lived in that environment, I would assume that's just normal. And that's like, right. And then I went, but I spent most of my time in a less well-funded lab, only to figure out kind of what you said, that pain point, just like, and then I was like, is this what life's like for most labs? Because most labs are not incredibly well-funded and flush with cash. And I like started to have these conversations with other labs, and they're like, oh yeah, like most of us can't afford equipment. And I was like, okay, this, like, it's time for me to start my company. So I completely, I can feel, at least I can imagine myself in your position at that time. You're just like, this is like a prevalent issue, but you probably would have not, you probably wouldn't have felt it as viscerally unless you were at Nora, which.
Exactly. So, at BioMarin, I always ask myself that question. Why didn't I have the idea for Seeker Health, the company that I found after Nora? Why didn't I have that idea at BioMarin? And the reason why I didn't have the idea at BioMarin is that even though I was managing that clinical trial, I was still pretty detached from it. I wasn't in this room of 8 people where we were like figuring out exactly how to make this happen. I had a director of clinical operations, and she had a manager of clinical operations, and he had, another analyst of clinical operations. And there were like lots of people, and they were dealing with it. And I was I didn't have as much visibility into the problem. And I also didn't have as much visibility into what they were doing to solve their problems, right? Like, by the time it came to me, it was all very strategic, and it was either it's working, it's not working. If it's not working, we're figuring it out, and this is what we're doing. We'll give you another report. I didn't have the intimacy, right, that I needed to have to know the problem. So I was never going to come up with this idea at BioMarin. I needed to be in a place where it was 8 people, and where, we were around the conference room, and it's like, the trial enrollment stopped, and we have to do something about it now. And like, where it becomes much more of like, oh, now that I'm deep in, we're like figuring out how to put together a website for this clinical trial, how to take in leads, how to, create ads. I was never going to get to do that at BioMarin because I was already too strategic for it. Yeah.
And there's probably like 8 people, 10 people, however many people that kind of subdivided that problem. And it felt like it wasn't a problem.
Exactly.
Because you have the ability, like, I think that's something about like venture creation and startup creation. I think this this is a John philosophy. I don't want to, say this is how it is. It's just like, I think an observation of mine is that like when you're incredibly well funded, you can kind of throw money at problems and assume it's not a problem.
Yes.
But when you're not so well funded and you have to, like, exactly what you said, there's like 8 of you and you're like, we can't just throw people at this because there's only 8 of us.
Yes.
You have to figure out an efficient way to do this. And you're just like, there is no efficient way to do this. Like, there is none. It doesn't exist. And you're like, that's where the opportunities like, and that's why I think sometimes, golden handcuffs, it can, like, being overcapitalized can also be a form of that, where you kind of you lose that intimacy of like going down to like the various, like peeling back the layers all the way and noticing that there's this problem that's latent. You can just assume that there are no problems because you're like, I'm just going to throw $100,000 at that thing.
Yes.
And it'll solve itself. We can staff this thing to the moon and like it'll be fine. Anyways, that's just me waxing a little bit philosophic or observing.
Absolutely. And I think maybe also the other thing is that, when I think about BioMarin, they had a lot more experience enrolling clinical trials than Nora Therapeutics did. So it could also be that really for BioMarin, this was a minor problem, right? Maybe at some points the trial slowed down, it didn't enroll as well enough, but it wasn't a massive problem. Well, at Nora, this was a massive problem that was directly in the way of getting to the milestone for this company, right? And so I think that's also the difference that I had to be at this role where this was the massive problem. This was the boulder that we had to move out of the way in order for me to figure out that, yes, I had been able to patch something up, but that what I really wanted to buy as a buyer didn't exist at that point. That instead I could like turn around and go and buy it.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast featuring Sandra Shpilberg. Join us next time for part 3 of our 4-part series, where Sandra shares how she went from laid-off biotech exec to first-time founder, launching Seeker Health from her living room and landing her first customer on LinkedIn. She'll also talk about what it took to build a profitable, bootstrapped business in clinical trial recruitment, why she focused on patient need over hype, and how she approached the decision to sell. If you're enjoying the series, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.